Keeper of the Lost Cities, Exile, Book 2, by Shannon Messenger. Chapter 4. It was only a dream. Sophie tried to tell herself as she wiped the cold sweat off her forehead, but her skin throbbed from the memory of the pain, and she could still smell the noxiously sweet sedatives that had burned her nose. And that voice, she would never forget that voice. She shivered as she crawled out of bed, tiptoeing across the carpet and pressing her ear against her smooth wooden door. Her racing heart slowed down when she heard Sandor's steady breathing on the other side. Deep down, she really was grateful for his protection. She just wished she didn't need him. Dex didn't have a bodyguard. He'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Sophie still felt horrible about that. She was the one they'd been after, because they wanted to see what she could do. But what did they think she could do? The question haunted her more than the nightmares, and she padded to her desk to retrieve the only thing she knew would calm her down. The silk-wrapped bundle had been tucked safely at the back of the bottom drawer, and she didn't remove the cloth until she'd hidden herself under her covers. The cool silver sphere turned warm at her touch, and the word "Spyball" glowed in golden letters, casting a dim light in her little cave of bedsheets. Sophie closed her eyes, needing a second before saying the names she'd carefully memorized, the names the council had forbidden her to know. "Show me Connor, Kate, and Natalie Freeman," she whispered, opening her eyes as the spyball flashed. 3 figures came into focus in the center of the orb. Her mom looked thinner, her sister looked taller, and there were streaks of grey in her dad's hair that Sophie didn't remember him having. But it was them, sitting around a dinner table in some faraway part of the world, eating fettuccine like the perfect, happy family, with no idea she even existed. It was what she'd wanted for them, what she'd begged for, to be erased so they wouldn't have to miss her in their new lives. But it wasn't easy being forgotten, especially since she couldn't forget them. She watched until her eyes blurred with tears. Then she smeared them away and whispered, "Show me Mr. Folkley." The spyball turned black and flashed the word she was getting very tired of: unknown. Her grip tightened on the sphere, trying to squeeze it into submission. She knew it wasn't his real name, but part of her kept hoping the spyball would somehow figure out his real identity. He was her only link to the Black Swan, the one who'd rescued her and Dex when they'd been taken, the one who triggered all of her new abilities. He'd even posed as her next-door neighbor when she lived with her human family, and was probably the one who'd planted the secrets in her head. He had all the answers she needed, but he didn't want to be found. She wrapped the spyball back in the cloth and returned it to its hiding place. The drawer above it held a thick teal book that she removed next, along with another silk bundle. She sank to the floor, leaning against the side of her desk as she unwrapped the bottle of moonlight. The pale glow made it just bright enough to see without letting Sandor know she was awake. Fingers traced the edged lines of the silver bird on the cover. A moonlark. Seeing it gave her chills every time. Alden had given her the memory log as a way to chronicle her dreams and keep track of any memories that weren't hers. But since the kidnapping, she'd been using it to conduct her own investigation into the Black Swan. She kept hoping they'd left clues in her memories that would tell her how to find them. The problem was, she had no idea how to access any of the secret information they'd planted. All the times she'd had flashes, there'd been something to spark the hidden memory, usually a note or gift the Black Swan had given her. Without anything to trigger the flashback, she was stuck wading through 13 years of memories, and thanks to her photographic memory, she had a lot of memories to sort through. But she'd been focusing on 2 incidents that felt like they had to be key. The first was when she was 5. She'd woken up in the emergency room, and the doctors told her she'd fallen and hit her head, and her neighbor had called 911. From that moment on, she'd been able to read minds. She knew now that Mr. Folkley had triggered her telepathic abilities that day. What she didn't know was why. 5 was incredibly young to manifest a special ability, and the talent had made it much harder for her to blend in with the humans. So why trigger it then? And why couldn't she remember what happened? The second incident was when she was 9. Again, she'd ended up in the hospital, this time for a severe allergic reaction. The human doctors never figured out what caused it, but a few months ago she'd found out the hard way, that she was deathly allergic to limbium, a special compound that affected certain areas of the brain. She even had to wear a vial of an antidote Elvin had created in case she accidentally consumed any. Only elves knew how to make limbium, but she knew now that she'd had contact with at least one elf back then without realizing it, and the symptoms of both reactions had been same. So someone must have given her limbium. But who? And why? 2 blurry spots in her past, both times when the elves had clearly interfered with her life. That couldn't be a coincidence. The kidnappers hadn't been able to wipe away her memories, but the Black Swan made her, and they'd had no problem planting secret information in her head. So couldn't they take some away? She needed those memories back. Deep in her subconscious, there had to be something left, a clue that could trigger some tiny piece they missed. She just had to find it. Iggy flitted over her leg, curling upon the top of her knee as she turned to the first blank page in the memory log. Come on, brain. Give me something useful this time. Still having trouble sleeping? Elvin asked, squinting through thick iridescent spectacles as he squatted in front of her. The morning sun streamed through the glass walls of the living room, where Sophie sat on the sleek white couch. Those dark circles are starting to look like bruises. I have a lot on my mind. He lowered his glasses to study her. Anything you want to talk about? Her mind flashed to her dizzy spell the day before, but she looked away and shrugged. She was tired of being tested and watched and fussed over. Besides, if something were wrong with her, Elvin would have found it by now. His glasses could see right down to her cells. Elvin heaved a sigh as he stood, looking incredibly out of place with his lime green germalin-covered tunic in the elegant, pristine room. Havenfield usually had a few books and gadgets strewn about, leaving splashes of colour, but Adeline had been on a cleaning rampage trying to keep herself distracted. Look up, Elvin instructed, slipping on his glasses again. Sophie obeyed, and her eyes caught the light from the cascading crystals of the chandelier in the front of the room. It felt like the coloured flash seeped into her brain, making her head throb. You all right? Elvin asked as she flinched. Why? Do you see something? Elvin frowned and leaned closer, squinting at her forehead. No, everything looks normal. She released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Everything looked normal. Everything was normal. She was just tired from the sleepless night. You really need to rest, Elvin said, echoing her thoughts. Maybe you should try some slumberry tea before bed. No sedatives. It's just tea. No sedatives. She'd lost weeks of her life to a drugged haze while she was held hostage. She never wanted to feel that way again. Elvin sat next to her on the plush couch. Fine, we can let the insomnia go for now. But if you don't start sleeping, we're going to have to come up with a plan. Understood? He waited for her to nod. Good, and I want to check on you in a couple of weeks. School will have started by then, so just come by my office. I'll have your usual bed ready. Sophie glared at the ground. Of course she had to visit the healing center during the first week of school. Her friends would tease her relentlessly about it, especially Keith. Glad you're excited to see me again. Elvin winked as he stood and pulled out his pathfinder. She opened her mouth to apologize, but a swell of panic surged into her mind and knocked her words away. What's wrong? I don't know. I think something's wrong with Sylvanie. She stumbled to her feet and raced toward the arched golden doors of Havenfield's main entrance. Sandor jumped in front of her. You must stay inside if there's trouble. A fresh surge of terror poured into her mind, cold and sharp. But Sylvanie needs me. When he didn't budge, she bolted for the back door. Sandor growled, so much like an angry bunny rabbit, Sophie couldn't help smiling as she slipped outside and took off through the pastures. Sandor chased after her, shouting for her to come back as she ran past pens filled with triceratops and woolly mammoths and one with some sort of enormous beetle-looking creature that must have arrived in the night. The intensity of Sylvanie's panic increased with every step, and when Sophie crested the final hill, her heart felt like it dropped into the pit of her stomach. A thick black harness bound the gleaming horse's wings, and 3 figures in dark hooded capes stood inside her enclosure, dragging Sylvanie away.